Okay, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Allison Atkins, the Assistant Director of the Kennebunk Free Library. We're very excited for tonight's program. Programs sponsored by the library are always offered free of charge. We never want income to be a barrier to participation, but both the library and the Planeteers are always grateful for donations to support future programming. There are links in the chat where you could donate to either. In normal times, a reading would often include a book sale and signing, and we can't do that these days, but we've included links where you can purchase the poet's books. I want to thank the Planeteers of Southern Maine, the moderator, Kate Chappell, and all of the poets who are here tonight for all the work they put into making this happen. And I'm going to turn it over to the Planeteers to introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Allison. So I'm Andrea Kimmick, one of the founders of the ad hoc grassroots organization known as the Planeteers of Southern Maine. We organize events that bring people together in praise of Mother Earth, as well as to advocate for her protection. Tonight is such an event. Indeed, it's our gala event for the spring season. So we are also what brought this all about was our being so thrilled about Maine's climate action plan. And we echo those who crafted it when they say that the plan is only as good as it gets acted on. So we're eager to act on that as now. Acknowledgement too that change is most likely to happen in community. So we Planeteers have partnered with Kennebunk Free Library in creating a webinar series this spring with expert members from not only Maine's Climate Council that will speak at each one of these, each one of the plan's sectors will be addressed in a different week. And also local area entities involved in efforts related to the goals that the plan sets forth. All links to zoom into these are on the library's events calendar. I guess all of you who are here tonight probably know your way to get there, found your way to get there. It's also, we'll post the links in the chat bar tonight. The kickoff for that climate action plan series is Monday the 5th, also at 6, so next Monday, 5 days away. It will be a lively and very informative overview session of the plan. Tonight, though, is a super special one to us. The first time we've ever done anything quite like this. Tonight, we are going to sit back and let the voices of a select group of poets direct to us in ways that the words of probably neither scientists or politicians would ever do. Tonight, we'll be able to center ourselves in consideration of what would Rachel say? Women poets speak. For those of you who know Jonas Mekas, the late Lithuanian poet and filmmaker, he warned us some time back, in the very end, civilizations perish because they listen to their politicians and not to their poets. I come from the New York's Hudson River Valley and have worked with Pete Seeger and friends. And I'm sure that many of you have had a similar experience about the power that song, dance, and poetry have. So I typically think of Frida and Diego, Keith Haring, Faith Ringgold, Ai Weiwei, poets Jose Marti, Neruda, Patti Smith, and then of course the amazing Amanda Gorman came on the screen most recently. Tonight's program is to introduce you all to still others. You will meet esteemed Maine poets and also one from Ithaca, New York, who have taken environmental issues to heart and have given them voice. Kennebunk's very own Kate Cheney Chappell will share some of her poetry and serve as moderator for the rest of the evening. She will provide further introductions to Kathleen Ellis, Megan Grumling, Natalie Dana Lolar, Megan Sterling, and Melissa Tuckey. As far as Kate goes, myriad of serendipitous connections led me to Kate, and I'm tickled that she has agreed to take on this lead role tonight. We're extremely to have her. We're extremely fortunate to have her with us not only here tonight, but in this town and on this earth. I'm getting choked up here for some reason. Poetry. So Kate Cheney Chappell is a painter, printmaker, and poet living here on the coast of Maine. Her work combines printmaking techniques, collage, and installation, and reflects her deep concern for the natural world. And somehow now the video came on, or am I just seeing that?
Yeah, we're going to put up the pictures of each book as people are introduced.
Oh, okay. So I was trying to get back to my screen now. Give me a moment. Well, here. Sorry, Kate. Let's see. She's a painter, printmaker, and poet living here on the coast of Maine. Her work combines printmaking techniques, collage, and installation, and reflects her deep concern for the natural world. A solo exhibit in 2012, Interrelated, marked the 50th anniversary of the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. In that beautiful book, Sherry Buckborough offers a lovely dedication and reflection on Kate's work. Herewith an excerpt that I've chosen that is particularly relevant to tonight's event. Rachel Carson proposed that all species on Earth are interrelated, a doctrine that guided a political movement to rethink the effects of human progress in light of their damage to the environment. Interrelatedness is fundamental to ecological thinking, but how can a concept so encompassing be imaged? Chappell's practice is to present it in moments and in metaphor. And I think that was beautifully put. Kate's art is also in the collections of the New York Public Library, Colby, Bates, and Bowdoin Colleges, and the University of New England. I hope you all have made yourself comfortable in the meantime and are ready to welcome Kate along with those she'll be introducing. Change happens in community. Together with all of you, we will hopefully emerge from a very, very silent and long spring. Thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Andrea. So good to have you all here, and thank you, Planeteers of Southern Maine and the Kennebunk Free Library for hosting this event. Champions of the environment, we need you, we want you. It's very important in what you are. Thank you, Allison, for being our Zoom host and support, and for gathering all the links that people will enjoy exploring in the chat. So welcome to the evening of eco-poetry. And I think we know who Rachel Carson is, but in that title, what would Rachel say? I was thinking about my first encounter with Rachel Carson reading her book, but then later when I moved to Maine, realizing that there are 13 places on the coast, estuaries and coastal lands that are dedicated to her up and down our coast. And we have one right here nearby in Wells. And it's really a beautiful place. Many of you have walked there. You may have, it's right between, you know, it's right between Parsons Beach and Lodholm Farm. And right there in the middle of the path is a big boulder, and on it is that quote, "All the life of the planet is interrelated. Each species has its own ties to others, and all are related to the earth." That inspired me when I read it for the first time, and again when I encountered it on my walks. As Andrea mentioned, and others have seen in the book that was shown, I did this exhibit in Pittsburgh to mark the 50th anniversary of the publication of Silent Spring. And I'd like to just share a few images from that show, but want to say that Rachel Carson really was the mother of modern ecology. But she was someone who upset the apple cart, and I'll speak about that in a little bit. She was a marine biologist who worked for the National Fish and Wildlife Service, and her brilliant nature writing inspired my generation. If you haven't read The Sea Around Us, I urge you to now. It is both lyrical and scientific and poignant today as our oceans warm and acidify. What happened with DDT, which was the subject of Silent Spring, was that during World War II, it had a ubiquitous use. It's the pesticide dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, which is a mouthful, and it was considered a wonder chemical during and after the war. It was sprayed on people for lice, to kill bugs that spread disease to troops, and later to spray in neighborhoods and over vast tracts of farm and forest. These are two works from the show where I have actually layered the spelled out word for DDT vertically, so they seem like branches, but the birds are caught in them. And this is a sobering fact. Each of us now has traces of DDT in our bodies. Rachel Carson published Silent Spring in '62, and it changed the course of history. The nation woke up to the harm that pesticides like DDT were causing to birds, insects, and mammals, and ultimately to us. Eagles were especially hard hit because DDT made their nests too thin and fragile. This is a monoprint I did of the eagle's nest. And with students on campus, I built an eagle's nest on the ground, an 8-foot wide, that's a double wide. Usually they're about 4 feet wide. And I filled it with raku eggs that had messages from Rachel Carson inside. At great personal and professional cost, Rachel Carson spoke out in her prose on television and on the floor of the Senate. The chemical industry mounted a vicious attack on her as a woman and a scientist, but she prevailed. A commission set up by President Kennedy justified her findings, and eventually DDT was banned. Raptors gradually rebounded. The Clean Air and Clean Water Act followed. So as we poets gather to read tonight, let us remember and honor a courageous woman who spoke out before us. I'll read just one poem, and then I'll introduce each poet in order. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end for discussion, and you can put your questions in the chat. I believe Allison is going to field those. So the title of my poem is called With Rachel in Her Refuge, and it starts with a quote by Rachel Carson. But man is a part of nature, and his war against nature is ultimately a war against himself. With Rachel in her refuge. In this refuge named for you, trees topple now and lean. I see you in the shape of the land, your head to the east, your sea-combed hair spread across the marsh, your mouth, the river's mouth, your hands, the estuary's fingers, patient for spring, waiting as the blowdowns erode your sides, slide and pull the very earth of you oceanward. Returning like seawater to salt pans, you wait for the whitethroat in the stillness of snow falling on dry leaves. Wait for your voice to rise through half a century's abuse into our time of wildfires, fracking, droughts, floods, challenging man and his war against nature once again, a still small voice, still waiting to be heard. So with that, I will introduce our first guest poet, Megan Grumbling. Megan is co-creator and librettist of the opera Persephone in the late Anthropocene and author of the recently released book of the same name, shown on the screen here. Her first poetry collection, Booker's Point, received the Vassar Miller Prize and the Maine Book Award for Poetry. And her work has been awarded the Poetry Foundation's Ruth Lilly Fellowship, the Robert Frost Foundation Award, and a Hawthornden Castle Fellowship in Scotland. She reviews film and theater for the Portland Phoenix, serves as poetry reviews editor for the Cafe Review, and edits the weekly Deepwater Poetry column in the Maine Sunday Telegram. Welcome, Megan Grumbling.
Thank you. And thank you to Andrea and Allison and the Planeteers in the library. I'm so excited to be part of this great lineup and this really inspiring homage. So I think, you know, as Andrea and Kate both were saying so articulately, a huge part of why Carson is so enduring and so powerful for us still is the power of her story and her sense of poetry as well as her science. And so I'm really just excited to be part of what everyone is working on tonight in the same spirit as we all grapple with where we are now with the world around us. So the way, in the poems I'm gonna read tonight, the way I'm using story to grapple with climate crisis is in kind of an allegorical way using myth. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking a very old story, the old myth, the ancient myth of Persephone, and bringing it, kicking and streaming into the modern age of climate crisis. So in the poems I'll read, there'll be a couple different voices. One is Persephone herself, of course, who instead of spending 3 months underground to correspond with our winter months is now coming and going erratically, drinking too much, some other inconvenient behaviors. We'll hear from her. We'll hear from a chorus, which is kind of like the humans that are fumbling through all this, figuring out what to do, enabling some of it. And we'll also hear a little bit from a new Farmer's Almanac for a new age. So the first poem is a chorus poem, comes from early in the book, and it's called Short Shorts, chorus encountering Persephone. At first, it was all beer gardens and orange dreamsicles. She wasn't supposed to be around now. These were her months to be away with him, eating stones and stroking clocks, or whatever she did with him. But she had chosen us. And at first, it was all holiday, all innocent debauchery whenever she appeared out of season. Here she was in a canary yellow halter dress, opening flows of hoppy ale. Here she was in short shorts, drenching us in dandelion fizz, or with huge buttercups, grazing our chins with yolk gold. We made merry, made noise, made hay, made out like magpies. Then she was gone again. She left us each time with our suddenly bared skin, our yellowed chins, and our chosenness, with our school child sensation of having gotten away with something slight but delicious. The new Farmer's Almanac word of the day: an exaltation is a flock of larks. Persephone's lark song, in which Persephone rationalizes some of her recent behaviors. I go for the light, a love of heights and thaw, sweets out of season, day-long trilling, trilly and prick. A whole flock's skyward veer and the white of underwing. Living in the dark takes will, irony, a strong stomach for dearth, dried fruit, and no harm time to time to sing too much in the sun, exotic plums, fresh blistered lemon on the lips. These flakes are just a lark, a least creature's thirst quenched. I do descend in time. Once I've soared trilling out of sight, I'll fold back wings and fall like a stone. Chorus song, her lover. She had taken a lover here, one of us. That was the latest. She couldn't stay away, couldn't say no, peeled him grapes, carved them into rosebuds and tiny big-bosomed nymphs, floated them in bowls of pennyroyal, egg white, and rye, indulged his slightest whim, peach sweet strawberries, apples crossed with conquered grapes, contorted limbs and throat to fit his kiss. This lover was a reckless inebriate, it was said, a narcissist, partial to unnatural rituals. One of us, it was said. We were stricken at the thought, but stirred, jealous, and thus ravenous. The new Farmer's Almanac migration forecast. Larks, starlings, and swallows south of the Maritimes are expected to again winter in place. In some songbirds, desynchronized migratory restlessness disorders may result in heightened risk to livestock, jet ports, and plate glass. So things get worse before they get better in our myth. As in this next one, another chorus song, Too Susceptible. It was her own fault that everything was going wrong. The acid and inundation, the blackouts, the drunken bees, so many green crabs that we raced them in the street. It was her fundamentally erratic personality, her wildness, which, however attractive, was more than a little inconvenient, dangerous even. Anyone who said otherwise was a romantic, a sucker for the most maudlin kind of sentimentality, for bucolics, bodice rippers. Others said she was too fragile, too susceptible, too partial even to domination. Some said it was our duty, our chosenness, our charity. The stories went that she binged, that she fasted, that her husband had grown wise. We debated, held back the harbor with sand, swallowed pills. We bet dimes on our favorites in the green crab races, but they all looked the same when they lost. And one more poem. As I said, it gets worse before it gets better in this myth, but it does get better after a long journey underground into the dark and back to some limits and some difficult self-reflection on the chorus's part. But they do come back to a light and a new way of seeing things. The life of her. Back above, we were bruised and spent, and home was no different. The green crabs, the standing pools. At first, our eyes had trouble readjusting to the light. Every leaf, wing, and limb was sharper, stranger. She was sleeping, drowsing there, her cheek pressed against the moss. We gathered, watched her sleep, grew breathless at the slightest tremor of her lips, at her freckles merging in the sun, at each bruise fading gently to yellow, at how she struck a faint tone, a little sharp, a smallest prick, each time she inhaled. She was alive, alive. We spoke the word over and over, the life of her, of every leaf, wing, and limb, rose in our chests, caught and wrung in our throats. Thank you.
Yay. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan. Next, we're going to hear from Melissa Tuckey. Melissa is a poet, teacher, and activist. She is author of Tenuous Chapel. Whoops, that's ghost fishing. Well, that'll be coming next. Tenuous Chapel is a book of poems selected by Charles Simic for the ABZ Press First Book Prize in 2013. And she's also the editor of Ghost Fishing, shown here, an eco-justice poetry anthology. Her honors include a fellowship at Black Earth Institute, a winter fellowship at Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and writing awards from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities and the Ohio Arts Council. Melissa teaches creative writing workshops from her home in Ithaca, New York. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you. Just adjust here. Thank you, Andrea and Kate and Allison and poets and everyone for coming out tonight. It's an honor to read with you and celebrate Rachel Carson. I'm going to read the first several poems from Ghost Fishing, which is Ghost Fishing and Eco-Justice Anthology, which I edited and which came out in 2018. And the book is a collection of environmental poems centered in social justice. And it's also one of the most culturally diverse collections of eco-justice poetry to date. And it pushes back at some of our notions of, some of our imagined notions about the environment, of wilderness being separate from humans, and asks us to consider our human homes as connected to nature and our connection to each other as vital to our survival on this planet and to justice. The first poem that I'm going to read is from Ross Gay, and it's the first poem in the book, And it references Eric Garner, who most of you may remember was selling onesie cigarettes, loose cigarettes in Staten Island, and was arrested and thrown to the ground and murdered on the street by the police. A small, needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Park and Recreation Horticultural Department, which means, perhaps, that with his very large hands, perhaps, in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants, which most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. A small, needful fact. And the next poem I'm going to read is by Linda Hogan, who's a Chickasaw poet, one of my favorites. This poem is from a section in the book of war poems. Bamboo. First woman was made of slender bones, like these that stand upright together in the rich green world of daylight. At night, they are a darkened forest of sisters who grow quickly in moving water and talk in the clattering breeze as if each is an open throat rising to speak. I tell a man about this beautiful creaking world, how it flowers all at once. He has been to war. He says with bamboo, they do terrible things to men and women. I look at this bamboo. It did not give permission to soldiers. It is imprisoned in its own skin. The stalks are restless about this. They have lived too long in the world of men. They are hollow inside. Lord, are you listening to this? Plants are climbing to heaven to talk to you. Linda Hogan. And the next one I want to read from Ghost Fishing is from a section on food justice. And this is from our forebearer, June Jordan. It's called Focus in Real Time. A bowl of rice, as food, as politics or metaphor, as something valuable and good, or something common to consume, exploit, ignore. Who grew these grains? Who owned the land? Who harvested the crop? Who converted these soft particles to money? Who kept the cash? Who shipped the consequences of the cash? Who else was going to convert the rice to cash? Who would design the flowers for the outside of the bowl? Who would hold the bowl between her hands? Who would give the bowl away? Who would share the rice? Who could fill that bowl with rice how many times a day, how many times a week? Who would adore the hands that held the bowl, that held the rice? Who would adore the look, the smell, the steam of boiled rice in a bowl? Who will analyze the cash the rice becomes? Who will sit beside the bowl or fight for rice? Who will write about the hands that hold the bowl? Who will want to own the land? A bowl of rice. And I just want to mention that Ghost Fishing I have a discount for anyone attending the reading who wants to pick up a copy. And the discount code is in the chat section, along with other books that you can purchase from this reading. So check it out. The book is a large book, so it is a bit pricey, and the discount is 20%. So it's a good deal. I'll close with two poems of my own, brief poems. The first one is Seneca Lake, and I wrote this in response to our fight here in New York against fracking storage at our beautiful Seneca Lake. Propane trucks idle, one more hour, one more day. Daffodils in bloom. Crow caucus darkly, awake as wind blows across hungry water. White waves blow sideways, shiver of wind through maple, an oriole sings. A child learning her letters, a hand-painted sign. I am the lake I love. And last poem is a poem for the TSA officers who rifled our bags to dump our homemade jam we were carrying as gifts. True story. You never can tell what those peaches were doing naked together in that Guatemalan basket, or how the moon whispered to an underground of resurgent garlic, winters when you thought the living world asleep. Beware the last red peppers of autumn, how they fatten into gorgeous fists raised in dawn and solidarity. Trust not the pickled relish. Keep an eye on those candied beets. Know that bees are amassing in goldenrod, hoping to keep their queen alive, as battalions of crickets play violin in the tall and anonymous grass. Trust not the sweat-sticky kitchen, uprising of steam as grapes royal, a delirium of kettle shaking goodness. Keep an eye on that elder who ladles the whole sweet mess into a bell choir of singing jars, each ping rousing, unexplainable delight. Know that in kitchens throughout this land, such sweetness is gathering daily. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was wonderful. Next up, we have Natalie Dana Lolar. And there she is, Dawnland Voices. Natalie Dana Lolar is a Passamaquoddy Penobscot tribal member by heritage and ancestral lines. She grew up in Indian Township, Maine, and she is a master's degree candidate at the University of Maine in anthropology and environmental policy. She draws on her ancestral inspiration and passion. That passion is for the Wabanaki people, their history, and their future understanding of archaeological importance around Indigenous voice and presence, and the understanding of past Indigenous lifeways, both within and outside of contemporary Wabanaki communities. She is the wife of Penobscot tribal member Kyle Lolar, and mother of 3 amazing children who share the ancestral bloodlines of those who came before, Susep, Aseli, and Niana. And welcome, Natalie. I wanted to mention before, you just saw a little bit of her drums, and they're well worth visiting. So look in the chat, beautiful drums that she makes. Take it away, Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who is involved in giving me this opportunity to read tonight. I will be reading a selection of 3 short poems. The first speaks to Petroglyphs as a marker of time and how it is rapidly changing due to rising sea levels. The second speaks to more than human others. To me, if we started treating trees, animals in this world as a more than human other, we would have to change how we live in this world, living with, not living on. And the third has to do with Indigenous people and land access. So the first one's titled Machias Bay Petroglyphs. I wonder, will things ever change as time slowly rips away? I wonder, as the water tears away chunks of stone, slowly changing, rapidly changing. I wonder, as I look upon this stone, how long will these stay here? I wonder, as the hunter listens for game, mother giving birth, what will I see? I wonder, as Abudumpkin slithers on the surface, and Thunderbird spreads his wings. I wonder, as the little people are dancing, what will I leave the Woganamasses today? I wonder, moose, deer, people etched upon this stone. What has been lost? I wonder about this magical place, this place that is born from our way of life. The second's titled Rooted Beings. Living, dying, quietly I sit here, recording these silent lives in my memory. Few pay attention, leaving rooted beings to themselves. These ancient ones stand proudly, listening to and watching the world around them. I wish I could see through their eyes, see how the world has changed. I see them unchanged, unconcerned with the world of man, as they dance to the sound of music only they can hear. They are always dancing, swaying from side to side. If you sit quietly, you can hear them whispering to each other. Whispering silently, it is the sound of rustling leaves to our ears. The feeling of them invokes what it is like to touch ancientness, as they are living and dying, and I sit here quietly. The third is in this time. In this time of posted land, where do we go? How do we live? No food gathered, no medicine picked, no game honorably killed and eaten. In this time of posted land, where can we go without being shot at? Can we live sustainably and maintain our culture? No sweetgrass picked, no ash fallen, no game hunted. In this time of posted land, where can we go? Where is the place? Where is our place? How do we maintain us as a people, living interconnected, no access, no lands to move about seasonally, no way to maintain our ancestors' way of life? In this time of posted land, where can we look for help? Can we call upon our allies? How do we know who to trust? No continual ancestors' lands, no way to move about in this time of posted land. In this time of posted land, is there hope? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Wonderful. So I'd like to introduce Megan Sterling next. Megan Sterling's work has been published in many journals and anthologies, including Rattle, Sky Island Journal, and many others. She is co-editor of the anthology A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, and associate poetry editor of the Maine Review. Her chapbook, How We Drift, was published by Blue Lyra Press in 2016, and her first full-length collection, These Few Seeds, which you see on the screen, is coming out in April, that's tomorrow, 2021, from Terrapin Books. She lives in Portland, Maine with her family. Welcome, Megan Sterling.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. So much talent and such incredible people. This subject is a subject very close to me. I have a 4-year-old daughter, just recently turned 4. And for me, all of my concern about the climate is interwoven with my concern for her. So it's a heavy topic, and it's one that I weave a lot in my book, These Few Seeds. And so I'm going to read 4 poems, and you'll see that my concern for the climate has everything to do with my love for my daughter. And with that, I'll start with the first poem, Daughter. Daughter, I dream that the earth is on fire beneath us. That is what love is. I take you into myself as though you are the petal, pink to the open hand, a plum stone sweet. And what was broken opens wide, all the things I never knew or felt in an explosion that feels like pain, but is fear and a terrible hunger to save all this for you to live in. An ocean that asks for tenderness, a sky that begs for quiet. The waves of your soft hair are all that stills the thrashing of a heart that's been submerged and drowned 1,000,000 times over. I need you to be safe, your face already a memory, as though the smoke from a burn pile has created its sepia tone. This next poem is called Monster in the Water. Living in Maine, water is something that you're constantly aware of in this different way. I mean, you're always aware of water, whether the need for water, the thirst for water, the absence of water, but here it's the presence of water. And so I write a lot about water, and this poem is called Monster in the Water. Every day I go down to the water. If I kneel there long enough, maybe I will become the water, ribboning as it flows, like the dance I learned as a girl, whereby whirling fast enough, no monster could reach me. And even if the monster is the water, as it rises, as it warms, not of its own doing, but of ours, if we make of it the monster that we are, as we make everything in our image, if we become the water before it becomes us, maybe we save something of it in ourselves, the silk of water as it rushes over our skin, the shine of water smooth beneath moonlight, the sad, slow wash of water as it runs towards an ocean that's rising, rising. This next poem is called Succession. This was also in the climate anthology, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, which there are a few people here in this reading tonight that are also in that anthology. Succession. 1. If only we had the sense to fix this, small as we are, sharp, powerless, like barnacles clinging to the dock as the water ebbs, the moon full on a desert of rock. It was our hunger that led us here. How we grow with our wide mouths, ready to eat the hull of the ship that offers safe harbor. How we crave an ending. 2. Remind me again how we got here, before the fires threatened, before our hearts woke up finally at the sight of our daughter, rising from the ash of our bodies, soft as the new moon. 3. All things go. The empty bed, the remains of a meal left on the counter, wood left to rot in the April rains, bath water collecting rust. We can see them again as they once were, light shining through midnight trees, when we felt we were owed something beautiful. Now we pray for a different phase to live through. 4. In moonlight, the world. How we dream the moon comes closer. We can show our child pictures. Flower moon, harvest, gibbous. Its surface is cold. There is beauty in where we are heading. 5. Tell us that it will be all right. Tell us our small lives can rearrange these certainties. We open the tarot. We chart the moonrise. We consult the stars. How much we must do before we can tell our child that we've left her anything. And my last poem, Apology After the Fire. Worn down, the sea rolls beyond sight. Sand stretches the way a shadow is cast from rock. The sun and unwanted heat. We have grown our flowers in the shade of the raised forests, our faces wrapped in gauze, our hands cupping the water. We save from the occasional rain and muddy stream. How did we arrive here? My daughter throws her scraps to the dogs that wander along highways that once were rivers, that once threaded themselves through a softening of green. My daughter knows the meagerness of water, our constant searching. But winds, fires, mud, rocks are in abundance where once there was grass, bud, butterfly. I want life to bloom around her the way she blooms, and for her to know the quiet of leaves, the hum of growing things. These few seeds I nudge into flower as apology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Wonderful. All the poetry is wonderful. And we have one more poet to read, and that is Kathleen Ellis. Kathleen, here we go. Kathleen's latest collection is Outer Body Travel, and her poems have recently appeared in the Cafe Review and A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis. Poems from her manuscript, Dear Darwin, were set to music and released as a Parma recording CD, which was nominated for a 2015 Grammy Award. Kathleen has coordinated poetry and science readings for the Maine Science Festival and the International Day of Climate Action. Her long poem, Circling Katahdin, was set to music and performed by the UMaine Chorus in 2005. A recipient of poetry fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Maine Arts Commission, Kathleen teaches poetry and creative writing and in the Honors College at the University of Maine in Orono, where she lives near the confluence of the Penobscot and Stillwater rivers. Kathleen?
Thank you. Oh, uh-oh. Is that me doing that or no? It's fine. Okay. Thank you. And what a pleasure, what a joy to hear a lot of poets I've never heard before read out loud anyway. I've read most of their work here and there. It's really interesting to go last. I mean, it's wonderful to go last because I have all your voices and words in my head and my body. And a lot of people don't like to go last because of that reason, but I feel stronger, and I don't know, I feel very vibrant because of having gone last. So this will be fun. In my edition of Rachel Carson, the 40th anniversary edition of the paperback anyway, Linda Lear, if anyone knows Rachel Carson criticism or the lecture circuit that Linda Lear has been on for years and years, she is a specialist in Carson, and I met her at a Rachel Carson environmental conference that used to be held every other year, I think, up in Booth Bay Harbor. Wonderful thing, and I hope they bring it back again, maybe after the pandemic makes it safe for people to meet together. And so in her introduction, she says that Rachel Carson intended to disturb and disrupt, and she did so with dignity and deliberation. I love that, and I love that about Rachel Carson. She didn't stop, even when she had breast cancer. She didn't stop. She didn't even tell anybody practically that she had breast cancer, and she just kept moving on and on. Unfortunately, she died before she was able to see the big changes that were made, but we need her now. We need her again, which is very sad. So I think it was Kate who called her the mother of modern ecology. So I was thinking about who the father was, and I have to say that the father of modern ecology, or at least of modern eco-poetics, is Gary Snyder. And Gary Snyder is a hero of mine. I took a class from him when I was in college. He's as down to earth as you can imagine. And he's a wonderful inspiration. So when he knew I was going to be moving to Maine from California, which I did in the late 1970s, all the way to Lubec, I know those petroglyphs in Machias. Those are so beautiful. He said, okay, you got to go there and you got to learn the trees. You got to learn the waters, especially where you're going, he says. And you got to learn the everything that's on the land, and you got to learn the directions, and you got to learn everything, or you can't stay. You can't stay. So I've been here ever since, except for a couple of years when I went back to California. So I'm going to start with something from a chapbook called Entering Earthquake Country, and starting with a poem called Unholy Spring. I don't know whether I had Rachel Carson's title in mind, but mine is called Unholy Spring. In the story of the world, we each gather the dark underpinnings of the invisible, and the bright moments of last year's gaudy tulips recede like the season. But what if the world's plot were not this decomposing humus, that rotten black fecundity? Would life shoot up like the stems of the tulips and their trembling interior? This is the only way we know to be fruitful, through the partial decay of earth, our hands so deep in compost, only the wild stench will be left to tremble, reeking. Leave to the sow-bugs and last year's tulips, the weedy things of the earth, the green and yellow stain of our beginnings. Though the earth is recalcitrant, it is dying to stay alive. And I think I've used that line in several poems over the years. I'm going to read a poem from this wonderful, wonderful anthology, thanks to Megan and others, A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis. One of the most wonderful things about it is all the artwork that goes with it. So you should get a copy of it. And my poem in here is called The Great Redundancy. And it is shaped, it's a shaped poem that moves out like water and then comes back. The Great Redundancy. The water is rising everywhere. Warming seas, melting glaciers, and ice sheets with nowhere to go, but into estuaries and tidal rivers. It's only a matter of time, before ancient maps of the world featuring sea monsters are selling out in the checkout lane. Everyone knows we're next in the lineup of likely suspects. Who said what and when and where do we go from here, and whether there's nowhere else to go but underwater, which can also be said of the great white sharks, long considered the most bloodthirsty carnivores on earth, now fleeing like lily livers whenever the killer whales show up at their feeding grounds. And even then, they do not escape alive. The feeding frenzy of the killer whales does not escape us. We are multiplying the monsters we can see and fear. We are building our house on higher ground. We are watching the news that tells us who is at the top of the food chain, not the orca, not even us, but these rising seas, eschewing the monsters we can see and fear. It's only a matter of time, whole families watching the shore slip out from under them. The next poem I wrote about the opening of dams on the Penobscot so that salmon can go much further to their breeding grounds. And now it's a item that's in the news again for Maine, and we'll see what happens with other dams. This is called "No Salmon Were Harmed in the Making of this Poem." For years, we've eaten Atlantic salmon once a week, like clockwork, sometimes Alaskan, but always American. There's something patriotic in the act of indulging in what's close to home, but we've never eaten them from the Penobscot. Endangered, yet we admire their resilience. With their lateral lines, they've invented a way to sense change in the magnetic field and pinpoint the river they once lived in. Last year, over 800 were back, not enough for a broodstock. But don't think this is an elegy. I've seen insects come back to life after lying comatose for half a day. I've seen a brook trout writhing in a pail suddenly leap back into the river. Wilderness enters our lives and we find a way to greet it. Walking beside the river past old logging booms, the rotting booms, we hear the salmon navigating, slapping the water like oars. We cheer them on as they pass by. Count me in, they say. Count me among the living. And I'm going to read two poems from Narrow River to the North, which was a project that had some funding from the Good Idea project from the Maine Arts Commission. And so I spent my money on a pilot who flew me over different parts of the Penobscot watershed. And so there's a lot of photographs in here, and a lot of the poems started out as haibuns, but there's only a couple of them that ended up being in the collection. And a haibun, if you don't know, is a prose, a couple of paragraphs usually, recalling the day, and usually it would have been in nature or you've been walking somewhere or something and you write about that. And then then you jump to a little haiku that encapsulates what you just had said. So I'm going to start with a prose piece here. A river is something that can be followed and take you places. The watershed is a network of trails, paths, roads, rivers, and streams stemming from the main artery. While it can be mapped and described, named and renamed, the complexity of the watershed is beside and away from the river. To hold the map in mind, we loiter by the river and follow its business of being water next to land. When, who was saying it? Was it Megan? Was talking about there's always water and the presence of water. And it isn't just the coast, it's everywhere in Maine, yeah. And then I was going to read another one, if I could find it. Disappeared. And this shows a photograph of I think the mill in Old Town, the paper mill that used to be there in Old Town. And so there's just pollution pouring out of the stacks here over the river. In the 6th century, Heraclitus said, "It is not possible to step twice into the same river. It scatters and again comes together and approaches and recedes. The river is largely complicit, and what it becomes is the flow of lives, everything we've poled and rafted, ingested, and spewed out of the commerce of the planet, the stench of chemicals, raw sewage, the swollen bellies of dead fish." And the last poem is a little trip. And so I'm looking at this from the plane and looking down, and we're going along the river. And so this is called the River Road, which I normally would drive because I did live on the coast for a long time and commute to Orono, but now I live in Orono. The River Road. Take Route 15 all the way, crossing over from Bangor to Brewer, eyes open for excavations of nature from the cities past Schonborough's construction site, once the first pulp mill along the river, past Pepina's taco stand, past the chlorine stench of the former Holtra Chem, past fishermen reeling in toxic fish from here to the bay, past the steep and rocky banks, past Bartlett Cove, where short-nosed sturgeon swim into the shallows to feed, past Buck's Ledge, Harriman Cove, past the spot where I once stopped for a bear to cross the road, past mom and pop groceries, 7-Elevens, and porno video shops, past Tannery Brook, past the 2-story stack of pulpwood and the gateway at Verso paper announcing the number of days without an accident, past the first sawmill on the lower Penobscot, crossing from Bucksport to Verona Island, and then at last the river moves into the bay, through the narrows, passing its burdens of toxins and mercury-laden fish, past Searsport, past Camden, passing on. Sort of ended with a dark note, but it would be I think without, and a number of us did look at this aspect also of Rachel Carson was an activist. She wants us to do something about this. And I think poets can be activists and do something about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, everyone. Yay. And we have a few minutes for a discussion amongst us. And I don't know if there are any questions that the audience has submitted, but I'd like to start with some thoughts that I had listening to everyone. I really was noticing the themes and resonances between us, and certainly the mother-daughter theme in Megan Grumbling's Persephone poems and in Megan Sterling's daughter poem. And then I heard that idea of passing on, Kathleen, and the river as a metaphor. You know, that passing on, you were talking about the burden of toxic living that we put into our waterways and they empty out into the ocean. But then I thought, well, what about passing on generation to generation? What are we passing on? And I think Megan alluded to that, and certainly Natalie has that as central to her work. The same river, the Penobscot, is important to both Natalie and Kathleen. And in that poem, Natalie, that you read, it was that line, that profound question that gripped me. How do we maintain us as a people living interconnected? That's a question you're asking for the Wabanaki people, but it's also a larger question for all of humanity. So I was thinking also that I'd read, Melissa, I read your piece in Poetry, where you say poetry, you think of poetry as an act of cultural resilience. And how is resilience in our eco-justice poetry? How do we bring it forward, and can we make a difference? That's a question I have. Rachel Carson protested through her writing for environmental justice in her day, but what place do we poets have in changing the way we treat the planet? So I'll just open it up if anyone would like to share their views and thoughts on these interconnections. So anybody want to jump in? See Kathleen's.
You want me to jump in?
Sure.
Okay. You know, I was thinking because, I forget when, about 2 months ago, maybe, or no, February 22nd, actually, because that's the birthday of Edna St. Vincent Millay, and that's the day that Lawrence Ferlinghetti died at the age of 101. And he was an activist. His whole life, he was an activist and a poet. And his poems, to some, are very repugnant because of the language sometimes that he uses and also the subject matter. But he also had a very firm interest in saving America, basically. How do we save America? And he wasn't just talking about the environment, but he was, in general, how do we somehow or another save what the ideal America was? And he, every time that there was anything that came up that was a possibility for protest, or you'd see him out there on the streets with and screaming his poetry or not screaming his poetry, or allowing people into his very famous bookstore, City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. And he would welcome, as does Gary Lawless, welcome in people from every variety of writing poems, but a particular interest in poems that can make change. And so for so many years, hundreds of years, people have said, oh, poetry doesn't change anything, including Auden saying that in a poem. How mean of him to say that. But we can make it. We can make change by pushing it to the forefront. And there's so many ways right now, and so many possibilities, like the Planeteers. I'd love to hear more about the Planeteers, and how we can get poetry more into their organization. I mean, we just have to put it everywhere, and I've talked enough now.
No, I just want to thank you, all of you poets. As a Planeteer, when we first started having this idea of this, thinking about this evening, I got choked up just thinking about it. And then when I think, Melissa, you were the first one to say, yeah, I want to do this, because I was actually trying to track down two of the poets that were involved in the ghost stories. And then each of you just came on and said, yeah, I want to be part of this. And I'm still getting choked up. I think the poetry, lyrics, musical lyrics, poetry, they speak to us somewhere that nothing else really can. And I think we Planeteers, it's a very simple thing that we try to do. We try to get people to do something that encourages the love of nature and the appreciation of nature. Our hope is that if they have that taste once, they will go after it again. We all do that when we like something. We want it again and again. So bottom line, it's that, but I just thank you all for being part of this evening. I also think, just picking up on what Kate was saying about the interconnections, something about innocence. It gets back to what you were just talking about, Kathleen, too, I think. There's something about innocence, and I mean, Megan, your whole, your reason for writing, that we want to guard innocence, and innocence has its place. But then again, if it weren't for your voices, how could all that be unveiled? I'm tripping all over my tongue, so sorry about that. I'll leave it to you guys.
I know one way that I sort of draw attention to it is a lot of my poems make people uncomfortable. And I think a lot of it is because I'm writing through really uncomfortable feelings myself. It reminds me of that famous line by Tolstoy where it's like, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. And I feel anguish, and it comes through in my poetry. And then people in the audience, or people who are listening, or people who are reading feel, I feel something that isn't comfortable. And I feel like for a lot of us, discomfort leads to action. And so for me, I feel like saying the thing that maybe you shouldn't say, or maybe that if you say, you're not going to be the most popular person at the party, but I'm going to say it anyway, because maybe by saying it, it moves someone to look at themselves and examine themselves just a little bit, so that maybe we can join together. Maybe after the party, they'll come up to me and say, like, that thing you said that made the room go silent, I really appreciate that you said that, and we can talk about that. So that's my piece.
I want to just mention, there's a long tradition of social justice poems and of poets making change. And though we often, there's pushback in academia against that notion, it's a long and rich tradition. And poetry brings us imagination into our circumstances. We listen to the news. The news is deadening. The political speech is deadening. It gives us no choices, Democrat, Republican, and some false fight or whatever that we're in. And it reminds me of William Carlos Williams's quote, which I always think of, which is, "It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet millions die every day for lack of what is found there." And I think poets are really important for revitalizing our language and connecting us. I know from working with ghost fishing and collecting, this culturally diverse collection of poems that, when we hear other voices, and especially when we have access to other cultures and their imaginations, our imaginations grow, and what is possible grows. And poetry makes it possible for us to see one another's humanity. And there's so many things right now trying to divide us and tear us apart, besides on top of the climate, in spite of the climate, as a way that they can get the oil and the gas and the resources and keep us separated and apart. So poetry is a way of calling people into community again. And it's very vibrant and alive. I feel we're very lucky to live in a time when there are so many wonderful poets writing right now, so many, changing poems. It is a time of change and hope, especially if you're tuning in to the voices of poets.
Thank you, Melissa. I wanted to mention that something I've done for a long time is bring poetry into unlikely places, particularly the business setting. In our company, Toms of Maine, we began every meeting with a poem. It was a way for people to connect human to human level before we got to any agenda or to-do list. It was about connecting as people. And I saw such a transformation in the whole feeling of a room when a poem was read and then some reflection on the poem and a kind of connecting with each other, just as people. And I still do that with meetings that I'm involved in. It's really quite remarkable. So I don't know if there are any other ways we can bring poetry into unusual places, but I'm open to hear that if people have ideas.
Well, it's
Yes, Kathleen.
warbling. Well, it's not very unusual, but I was wondering if Megan might say something about music and poetry and performances and whether or not she thinks that that's valuable, or I'm sure she's still doing it. So can you say something about that?
Yeah, well, I think, music and poetry together in a performance space kind of physicalizes what so many of us have just been talking about feeling together, being in a story together, feeling a whole variety, a whole arc of emotions together and going through a journey together. And we do that when we're just in a room hearing a poem, or in a Zoom room hearing. And I think the music aspect and the performance aspect can just bring even more to that. I think, you know, sitting in the room allows us to be in these different stories, hear these different voices, whether they're the voices of other, our neighbors from any culture, the neighbors that are the plants and the animals around us, and feeling with them as well. And also thinking about who is telling the stories that we hear, that we are telling ourselves, that we're sharing with each other, in so many different ways. Are we hearing the stories of enough of us in all the senses? The stories of the grass, the stories of the salmon as well. All of the stories are important, and thinking about those, the implications of those stories, as well as, you know, our human stories. So all that feeling together.
That's good.
Anyone else have a thought that we haven't heard from? Do you have anything to add? Natalie?
I was just going to say that I usually bring in poems to an unlikely place. I bring it to my academia through including them in my essays, just because I like to take these ideas of ecology and anthropology and archaeology and climate change, and wrapping them up in a poem and having them in my essays. And I think it really helps my voice speak louder.
Thank you. Wonderful. So, anyone else want to jump in here? If not,
I'll add a thought
Yeah.
about
please.
sharing poems in unlikely places. I've done some haiku workshops at our library here, and we did haiku, social solidarity haiku writing by Zoom last winter, and we've put them up in these giant windows so that people walking by on the street get to see poems. And I know there's poems in buses, and there's poems on streets and sidewalks, and you know, we can think about having poems in more places and inviting people to participate.
Great thought. Yes. Yes, I've seen that in New York on the buses and in Central Park. It's wonderful. Okay, I think we are close to 7:30 almost. Anyone else want to add anything? Let's see, I think everyone has spoken. Are there any questions, Allison, from anyone out there in Zoom land?
There are a lot of thank yous in the chat, but no questions.
Okay, great. Well, it's wonderful to see so many people and some familiar faces and names. And I hope you all will think about tonight and what action you might take, even if it's to promise yourself you'll read a poem a day. That would be a good start. Think about Rachel Carson, think about our commitment as people to this fragile island home that we live in. The planet is really needing our attention and care. So thank you all for joining in, and thank you, poets. It was wonderful to hear you, really, so wonderful to hear you. And I look forward to the day when we can be in the same room and hear each other fully in that way. And let's see, Allison may have some little remarks here about YouTube, correct?
Yes, I just wanted to let everybody know. Sorry, now my microphone's doing that. This will be going up on the library's YouTube channel within the week. So if you want to watch it again or recommend it to somebody else, it'll be up there for you to view.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Have a good spring. Have a noisy spring, let's hope. Spring peepers and all.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.